The Allied invasion of French North Africa in November of 1942 was intended to draw Axis forces away from the Eastern Front, thus relieving pressure on the hard-pressed Soviet Union. The operation was a compromise between US and British planners, as the latter felt that the American advocated landing in Northern Europe was premature and would lead to a disaster at this stage of the war. The operation was planned as a pincer movement with US landings on Morocco's Atlantic coast and Anglo-American landings on Algeria's Mediterranean coast. There was also a battalion-sized airborne landing near Oran with the mission to seize 2 airfields. The primary objective of the Allied landings was to secure a bridgehead for opening a second front to the rear of the German and Italian forces battling the British in Libya and Egypt. However, resistance by neutral or potentially pro-German Vichy French forces needed to be overcome first. After a transatlantic crossing, the Western Task Force effected its landings on the 8th of November. Naval bombardment had been deemed unnecessary, in the vain hope that the French forces would not resist. In fact, the initial stiff French defence caused losses among the landing forces. However, by 10th of November, all landing objectives had been accomplished, and US units were poised to assault Casablanca, whose harbour approaches were the scene of a brief but fierce naval engagement. The French surrendered the city before an all-out attack was launched. The Centre Task Force, composed from assets based in the United Kingdom, also encountered resistance by French shore batteries and ground forces to its 8th November landings. Vichy French warships undertook a sortie from Oran's port, but all were either sunk or driven ashore. After an attempt to capture the port facilities failed, heavy British naval gunfire brought about Oran's surrender on the 9th of November. Operations on the Eastern Task Force were aided by an anti-Vichy coup that took place in Algiers on the 8th of November. Thus, the level of French opposition on the landing beaches was low or non-existent. The only serious fighting took part in the port, where US Army Rangers were landed to prevent the French from destroying facilities and scuttling ships. Resistance had been overcome by the evening of the 10th of November, when the city was surrendered to the US and British forces. The invasion of North America accomplished much for the Allies. Perhaps most important, American and British forces finally had seized the offences after 3 years of German and Italian forces dictating the tempo of events. Now forced to fight on both its eastern and western flank, the German Army Panzer Afrika Korps faced an additional burden of having its tenuous logistical train across the Mediterranean subject to further attack. Bases in northwest Africa, meanwhile, could contribute to the prosecution of the anti-submarine campaign in the eastern Atlantic. The movement of some 100,000 sailors from the United States and the United Kingdom through the hostile waters and onto the contested shores demonstrated successful, if far from perfect, collaboration between the British and American staffs. Taken in combination with the Americans' promising campaign in the Solomon Islands and the Soviets' apparent ability to hold the Eastern Front, the Allies were positioned significantly better in late 1942 than they had been in the early spring. As if to drive home this point, President Roosevelt, Prime Minister Winston Churchill and the combined chiefs met at Casablanca itself in January 1943 to determine the next steps for further rolling back the Axis. Despite these many positives, torch fell short of expectations. Tunis did not fall quickly to the British and American forces. Their presence in North Africa and threatened assault of southern Europe also failed to draw away large numbers of Germans from the Eastern Front, a key strategic rationale given for the operation. At a tactical level, the assault of Moroccan beaches revealed serious problems with the logistics, communications and command and control approaches the Navy and Army employed for this major amphibious operation. The sailors and soldiers were also fortunate to face Vichy French defenders who fought with limited supplies. To their credit, however, the American leaders acknowledged these various shortcomings and their good fortune. Almost immediately, they set to using this experience in preparation for tougher tests in the near future. Casualties in Operation Torch were relatively light on both sides, given the scale of the operation and the amount of the US suffered 526 killed, 837 wounded, while 574 British troops were killed in action. Some 1,300 French were killed. About 460 of these losses occurred during the naval engagements offshore. Operation Torch with subsequent offences against the remaining Axis forces in Tunisia would end the German and Italian presence in North Africa. With North African, Atlantic and Mediterranean ports open to Allied shipping, and Tunisia just 1,000 miles from Sicily, North Africa would serve as a base for the Allied invasion of Sicily, ultimately the campaign against Italy.